Yes, hello and welcome in our virtual OECD Berlin Center room. And I'm very happy that we've been able to organize together with Institut Badań Strukturalnych in Poland an event on our recently released Employment Outlook, which will focus on the specific situation in Central and Eastern European countries. And I think this is very important at the current juncture because with the ongoing war in Ukraine, this region is under particular pressure. And it's important to look at what this means for labor markets, which have struggled with a number of other challenges, more structural challenges for some time, including skills shortages. I'm very happy to welcome my colleague Oliver Denk, who will introduce or will present the main findings of the Employment Outlook. And he will be complemented by Iga Magda, who's from the Institute for Structural Research in Warsaw, so our partner for today. And she will focus a little bit more, zoom in on CEE countries. And after that, we'll have a discussion with, all the representatives of different institutions that are important for the labor market. So we have Agota Salic, she's a labor market researcher at the Budapest Institute in Hungary. We have Sławomir Adamczyk, who's from the Solidarność trade union in Poland, and we have Vladimira Drbalova, and she is from the Confederation of Industry of the Czech Republic. So we have the social partners and also a researcher. We have Poland, Czech, and Hungary, and I'm really looking forward to that discussion. But without further ado, Oliver, I give you the floor, and you will introduce us into the main findings of the Employment Outlook.
Very good. Thank you, Nicola. You are also giving me the screen, I think. Can everybody see this screen well? Very good. So thanks again, Nicola, for the introduction. So I will give an overview of the findings of the OECD Employment Outlook. The Employment Outlook is the main annual flagship publication of my directorate, so of the Directorate for Employment, Labor and Social Affairs. In my presentation, I'm going to focus on the recent labor market developments and also the policy considerations. I should really say at this point that there are other important chapters in this edition as well that take a more longer term view. One of them, for example, looks at firm concentration and employer power in labor markets. Another one looks at wage inequalities between and within firms. And there's also one on working time arrangements. These are really great topical chapters that use novel cross-country microdata. So I really, recommend, if you can, taking a look at those as well. So in the presentation, I will put a specific focus on the OECD countries in Central and Eastern Europe. There are 8 of them. It's the Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, the Slovak Republic, and Slovenia. And we will see that there are, a lot of commonalities, but also differences. So this will surely make for an interesting session. So let me start here with where do labor markets currently stand? And it's partly looking back as well, this chart. So this, checking the health of the labor market looks at the unemployment rate at 3 different points in time. The latest reading from July this year, but also pre-crisis level from December 2019, and then the peak level during the COVID crisis. So if we just look at the dark brown bar in the middle there, where it says OECD, we can see that the unemployment rate stands at 4.9%. At the moment, it's well below the pre-crisis peak of 8.8% from April 2020. It's also below the level that we had seen in December 2019. It was really a fast recovery from COVID, thanks also to the massive policy support. The countries in Central and Eastern Europe are shaded in red. The picture is quite similar for them. unemployment rates have come down a lot from the crisis peaks. Perhaps what's a bit different is that there are a few countries where unemployment is still somewhat higher than what it was before the crisis. So that's, for example, the case for Estonia, which is more to the left, and also for Hungary, which is more to the right. Unemployment rates are lower there. So a good, strong recovery from COVID in general, but there have been large differences across industries, and this is what we can see in this slide here. It shows the percentage change in employment by industry, and it compares the first quarter of 2022 to the first quarter of 2019, both for the OECD and for the average of the 8 Central and Eastern European countries. Here, the industries are ranked from low pay to high pay from left to right. So those on the very left, accommodation and food, they have the lowest average pay. And those on the far right have the highest average pay. And so what really comes out of this chart is that the recovery has been quite different across industries, in fact. So in low pay service sectors like accommodation, food, entertainment, recreation, employment is still below the levels compared to before the crisis, whereas in other industries, especially like energy sector, ICT, employment is quite a lot higher. Now that clearly has something to do with it's a legacy from the COVID-19 crisis where accommodation, food, entertainment, recreation took a hit. The pattern is overall very similar, in fact, for the OECD and Central and Eastern Europe. There's some differences, but the general message is the same, that low pay industries have not recovered as fast as high pay industries. But still overall a strong recovery. And so as the recovery progressed, reports of labor shortages have increased in many countries. This is shown in this chart here. It gives the difference in the share of firms that report labor shortages between the last quarter for which we have data, so the second quarter of 2022, and the corresponding second quarters before the crisis. It breaks it down by manufacturing and services. And so a positive number here means that more firms are reporting labor shortages now than before the crisis. And so on average, we can see there are labor shortages in most countries for which we have data. But actually for countries in Central and Eastern Europe, the picture is quite mixed. So on the one hand, we have Hungary and the Czech Republic more towards the left, where in fact, labor shortages have fallen according to the data here that we have at least. Whereas in Lithuania, for example, and in Slovenia, 2 countries more on the right, they've become more severe. So there, we see a more typical picture that we had seen in other countries. So this has been the recovery from the COVID crisis. Of course, now, we can talk about a tale of 2 crises. So we're going from the COVID-19 crisis to the new cost of living crisis, meaning rising inflation impacting real incomes. Rising inflation is impacting real incomes across the income distribution. All households are affected, but some households are affected more than others, and this is shown in this graph here. It gives the share of consumption expenditure on energy and food, and of course, energy and food prices have increased particularly. And it gives it, for the bottom 20% and top 20% households in the income distribution. And so we can see here that in all countries for which we have the data, lower income households, the bottom 20%, spend more on energy and food than higher income households. And hence it means that lower income households have been affected more by the energy and food price surge. For the 6 countries in Central and Eastern Europe, for which we have the data, so on the right, in fact, another insight, stands out. So households in these countries, they seem to spend a larger share of their budgets on energy and food, whatever their income. Okay, so even the high income households in countries in Central and Eastern Europe spend more on energy and food than high-income households in other OECD countries. So, from this perspective, the energy and food price surge is hitting households in Central and Eastern Europe more than households in other OECD countries. So high inflation, and that is, of course, then affecting real wages as well. Here we can see the projected wage growth for 2022. It's still projected because we don't have final data. We are still in 2022. And it shows both nominal and real wages. Nominal wage growth is in purple. So for all the countries depicted here, nominal wage growth is positive. Wages are growing. But inflation has been so high that, when you account for inflation, real wage growth has been negative in all countries, except for one, which is Hungary. So in 7 of the 8 OECD countries in Central and Eastern Europe, real wage growth has been negative. Now, this projection is from June. So there are clear risks of a further deterioration on labor markets due to further escalation from the fallout from Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. So these numbers could become worse. There are clear risks. They're already, quite bad, let's say, for example, Czech Republic or Estonia, more than 5% drop in real incomes projected. Now, what should be the labor market and social policy response, to these recent labor market developments? Now, the first pillar that really stands out is collective bargaining. Collective bargaining needs to be fostered for 2 reasons. First, to ensure adequate wage increases. So this is important. But it also needs to stay prudent to avoid a wage price spiral. Now, in fact, when we look at the data shown here, over past decades, collective bargaining has weakened, both in the OECD, which is in black in both charts, but also in Central and Eastern Europe. Whether we measure it by the share of unionized workers, which is on the left, or the share of workers covered by collective agreements. Now, this decline of collective bargaining makes a wage price spiral less likely. So this is a good thing in a sense, but of course it also makes it more difficult for workers to receive adequate wage increases given the high level of inflation. The second pillar of the policy response should be adjusting minimum wages to inflation, which would really help the lowest paid with the higher costs of living. Again, we can focus first on the purple dots, which gives the nominal minimum wage growth over the past 12 months. It's positive or 0 for all countries here. So nominal wages have grown, but nominal minimum wages have grown in all the countries. But again, because of the high inflation, real minimum wages have declined in a large number of countries. In fact, if we focus on the dark brown triangle in the middle there for the OECD, minimum wages have declined by 2.5% in real terms in 2022. It's quite significant. And what is even more worrying in the context of Central and Eastern Europe is quite a few countries are among those where the real minimum wage has fallen the most. Latvia, the Czech Republic, Estonia, the Slovak Republic. At the other end, we have Hungary, where there has been an increase in the real minimum wage. A third pillar of the policy response should be, and it has been, energy support measures in many OECD countries to really soften the rise in energy costs. What's important, we believe that it should be targeted for those in need. When we look at the data, we see that countries have taken income support measures, but also price support measures. But in practice, targeted measures have been more frequent as income support measures, especially transfers, in fact. And targeted measures are better. Why? Well, one, they lower the fiscal costs involved. Second, they also expand demand less when inflation is already high. And they are also more generally in line with the challenge to confront climate change. So overall, I think our stance is that countries have some way or there's scope for countries to shift from widely available price support measures to targeted income support measures. Another priority should be active labor market policies to support the low-skilled and worker relocation post-COVID. This chart here depicts the budget for ALMPs. And as we can see, it's above 50% in all years and for all types. So in each year since the start of the COVID crisis, a majority of OECD countries have increased their budget for here labor market services is job search support. And they also increased it for active labor market measures. So this will be training or employment incentives. I mean, just to take an example, for 2020, the main crisis year, 7 of the 8 OECD countries in Central and Eastern Europe increased the ALMP budget. It was only Latvia where the ALMP budget decreased slightly. So all this is good. Increasing spending is important, but it will, of course, also be important to make sure that the additional money is spent in an effective way. This is my final slide, and it covers, it refers to, it really motivated by the COVID crisis and what we've learned over the past 3 years of the importance of frontline workers. It was really laid bare during the crisis. So typical frontline workers are workers in healthcare, long-term care, or essential retail. They really help to keep the economy and life going. These low-pay, contact-intensive service occupations, really the job quality in them is sometimes rather poor, and really the policy concern is that these workers are in a sense, underpaid and the overworked. And so in many countries, what we can see is that there's a shortage of workers for frontline jobs. This is shown in the left panel here. The 2 left bars here, around 80% of OECD countries report that worker shortages in healthcare and long-term care have become more severe since the COVID crisis. It includes, for example, the Czech Republic, Lithuania, Poland, and Slovenia as well. And so some policy measures are depicted on the right there. Countries have taken some policy measures to make frontline jobs more attractive. They've especially given out one-time crisis rewards. Still, our judgment is that these measures do not really go far enough to increase salary levels more permanently. There have been few initiatives, in fact, in this area. They don't go far enough to improve job quality in these jobs and reduce labor shortages in these industries, and simply not enough to make sure that the pay for these workers reflects the true value of the work that they are doing. So this brings me to the end. Thanks for your attention, for listening. I think we've seen quite a few differences across also countries in Central and Eastern Europe. So I'm really looking forward to some of the more country-specific views of the other participants in the session. Thanks. Back to you, Nicola.
Thank you, Oliver, for this super interesting introduction. And I will now ask Iga to complement this a little bit with a more Central and Eastern European specific view. Iga, it's your turn. And you're possibly muted, Iga. We cannot hear, at least I cannot hear or see you. Is it possible? So I can see your slides, but I can't see you.
Now it's better. Sorry.
Yeah.
Is it working? Yeah, fine. Okay.
There you are. Good.
There I am. Exactly. Thank you very much. So thank you, Oliver, for the great presentation. I would like to just complement it with some more data, some more country or region specific information on inflation, nominal and real wage growth, skills shortages, and working time flexibility. So like 4 points I decided to focus on in my very, very short presentation. Oliver has discussed inflation, showing us real and nominal wage growth, but this is the inflation which is behind these figures. So you can see the inflation rates across Europe, they are high, but you can also see that they are much higher than the EU average in Central and Eastern European countries. In fact, Poland stands here at 15%. Actually, the Central Statistical Office of Poland has just announced today the latest figures of over 17%. So that seems to be accelerating further. And therefore, despite the quite high nominal wage growth in some of the countries, again, what Oliver was showing, we actually end up with a picture of substantial decrease in real wages compared to 2021. And here, as also Oliver shown, Hungary is the only Central Eastern European country that still has a positive real wage growth in the last year. With respect to the labor shortages that we are seeing, here is a graph that takes a bit longer perspective for Poland, showing the percentage of firms that indicate that they see a shortage of skilled labor, and that is limiting their activity in Poland. So here, that's a focus on skilled labor. You can see that that has been changing over time with some stronger increase in 2018, 2019. And a slight decrease in most sectors afterwards, but still, on average, there are around 25% of companies that indicate that indeed the shortage of skilled labor is an obstacle to their economic activity. I would also like to say a few, focus more on the working time flexibility and working from home, as this is a topic that is covered also in the Employment Outlook this year. Very interesting. I have two graphs for you, three graphs actually. One is from a study that we did on the Eurostat latest data on working time flexibility in Europe. It was an ad hoc module to the labor force survey in 2017. So the data actually comes from 2017. And what you can see here are already adjusted rates of working time flexibility measured as either a way of having some flexibility in choosing the hours of work or being able to take a day off at a short notice. And you can see here that there is a quite substantial gap in the degree of working time flexibility or incidence of working time flexibility. So the possibility of workers to have some flexible working time between Central Eastern European countries and actually Southern Europe as compared to Western or Nordic countries in particular. So here, and there are vaguely any gender differences, although that would something we would expect here with respect to this working time flexibility in Europe. And indeed, Central Eastern European countries stand out as the region where the percentage of workers, including parents, declaring that they have some flexibility in managing their working time is really very, very low. Here is a graph that is showing you the share of people who usually work from home in European countries, 2019 and 2021. Of course, COVID has changed a lot in this respect. And while working from home will probably remain with us after the pandemic, the question is how important it will be as a job amenity. And here, actually, my colleagues from IBS have studied that in more in more detail, trying to learn whether employers and employees are willing to work from home more and how much they are willing to pay or how much they are willing to give up as pay for having the opportunity to work from home. And they have found that it's just like few of the several findings they have, that while most workers prefer to work from home, especially for 2-3 days per week, no surprise here, managers demand much larger wage cuts for working from home than workers would like to sacrifice. And that is a challenge for the mismatch between the preferences of workers and of employers. Okay, I hope I stick to the time, even short. Thank you very much, and I also look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Iga. You gave us important insights, and at the same time, you made up some of the time short that Oliver took. So that's great. We can dive straight into the discussion, and perhaps given what we've seen here in the in the slides, in the data, I would like to start with you, Slavomir, because what we've seen is, on the one hand, important labor shortages. We've seen also that the sectors, rather lower pay sectors that were a bit at the front line during the COVID crisis, they struggle to recover in terms of employment. And on the other hand, the big shortages, so the others, the higher paid sectors, or the sectors with higher paid jobs, they recover fast, and there are also important labor shortages in most cases. So my question to you is, or a third element was, we see really big erosion in real wages, despite quite impressive nominal wage growth. So my question to you here is, what does this mean? Is it, from a trade union perspective, in some ways a good thing, because basically people are moving away from low pay sectors and they can move to higher pay sectors? Or does it not benefit the same workers? And what needs to be done, in your perspective, to do something about this real wage erosion, to make sure that there's good work that people are willing to accept, to address those labor shortages also?
Thank you, Nicola. It's a really perfect set of questions, which I cannot answer in a few minutes, which you gave me. But first of all, I would like to thank for the presentations, which can serve as a background for our brief discussion. I have only one remark also related to this, what I said next, because the current Russian madness calls into question the possibility of predicting the future of anything at all, also as regards European labor market development. So we should bear this in mind. We don't know what will happen next, tomorrow, next week. So we see, but taking into account this OECD report, I would say that it perfectly shows the problems, as always. I know the previous reports. It also gently suggests solutions. But my impression is that mostly no attempt is made to take this into account in national employment policies by the governments, but also by social partners, which is a pity. One additional remark, as I understand, I'm expected to put forward the trade union point of view. So I will be half and half, because I also have my personal thoughts, not always in line with official trade union perspective, as you know. But this, coming to your question, of course, we have in Poland labor shortages, which are of permanent nature. This is due to two factors. First one is phenomenon of kind of brain drain towards west of EU. This is the answer of one of your question, whether somebody can look for a better paid job. Yes, of course, but not in Poland, but out of Poland, on the west part of the EU. But this is visible process. The second process, which is objective nature, of course, this is aging of the society. So when you took this into account, it's obvious that we look some kind of solutions how to address these labor shortages, which are of permanent nature. One of this answer is telework. It was mentioned by Iga in her presentation, and I must say that telework is welcome because it gives very simple and direct answer for these shortages, as it provides a simple opportunity for two groups to enter the labor market very quickly: mothers with young children and people with disabilities. So it's very easy to thanks to this mechanism, to enter to labor market. It could ease in some way these shortages. And of course, I think that telework is a very controversial issue, but it is valuable for the employers from different reasons. This is also valuable for for new generation of employees. I mean, these young generations entering the labor market very much emphasize the desire for flexibility from themselves. And this gives for them, for example, hybrid work. This is what Iga present in her presentation, because people do not want full-time telework, they prefer hybrid work. And this is important from the perspective of trade unions. Why? Because we as trade unionists must also see the dangers as regards working conditions. First of all, psychosocial, so the lack of work-life barrier, the problem with right to be offline, but also some very trivial ergonomic ones. And there is fundamental issue, restriction of socialization in the workplace, which can result in problems for organizing in defense of collective interest. So for us, it's important to address these expectations of these people who enter the labor market, who want to work on telework, but on hybrid, but also in this way that we will be able to represent them effectively. This is very important. This is one answer. The second answer for these shortages is migration, of course. It's migration. Maybe you don't aware, you are not aware, but Poland has already become a permanent host country for a huge number of third country nationals looking for work. And on absolute scale, we have probably surpassed even the US. A few years ago, migrants from Poland went to the West. Now we are host country for migrants from outside of the EU. And this is some kind of solution for shortages on the labor market. But the problem is that they don't want that immigrants just work at the bottom of the income ladder, because sometimes they are highly qualified persons, so need some kind of very precise, long-term, coherent migration policy, not only in Poland, but also in other countries of the region. And in my country, there certainly isn't one such policy, and never has been. That's a real problem. We should bear in mind that we need people from outside, and we should address some proposal for them. It's very much related also to the, I would like to say, lifelong learning schemes, because we need to prepare those people from outside, but also our citizens. This is a problem of all countries, the problem of this, that we don't have developed the lifelong learning schemes for people. So I don't know. I think I left the time for other discussions.
Yes, thank you, Sławomir. Yes, that's a very insightful, and just a mini anecdote, but I used to work, Liga knows well, on Poland quite a bit. And even years ago, before the war, I remember I was talking to the other trade union, OPP, and they told me at the time that they had reopened their office for Ukrainian workers that already existed before the war, because even at the time there were many, and the challenge was to integrate them into the labor market in line with their qualifications, which were often very high. But Vladimira, to turn a little bit to the Czech Republic and also to perhaps the perspective of employers. So again, we've seen real wage erosion. A bit curiously, perhaps, it seems that the skilled shortages, at least in that data, seem to have waned a little bit in the Czech Republic and in Hungary. Perhaps if you have thoughts on that, that would be interesting to hear. But perhaps more broadly, so this real wage erosion, is it also a concern for employers in some ways? Of course, wages are costs to employers, but on the other hand, if you want to gain and retain workers, it's important that wages do not erode. And probably the picture is very varied, right? We talked about energy intensive industries, and they can hardly cope with all those costs at the moment, and probably cannot think about making sure that that real wages are not eroding, but there are other sectors that probably are still quite profitable, like informatics, etc. And perhaps there is more, of an issue that employers can really see. So it would be interesting to hear your perspective on that cost of living crisis and what it means for the labor market in the Czech Republic.
Thank you, Nicola. I understand your question, and I will connect it also with some comments to the presentations and to Slavomir, because it is a complex issue. I think I am happy to be part of the discussion, because it is always good to have a broader picture, and listening both presentations and reading the OECD Economic Outlook. I can see that there are similarities in the challenges and differences in solution and a mix of tools and measures. And all these new phenomena are the same in the Czech Republic, and there are many things influencing not only economy generally, but today we are talking about labor market particularly. So there are definitely 3-4 big issue. Energy prices, this is the base for the further solutions. Definitely inflation rate, labor market shortages. So definitely we have what is important is that we have to look for good timing to concentrate firstly on these urgent solutions and approaches, and then to think also in the future and to solve the problem also with medium and long-term tools. I would like to say that anything about inflation and real wages development in the Czech Republic, we have a very high inflation rate, 18%. And there is a forecast for 20% till the end of this year. And this fast rise of inflation rate has a significant impact on real wages. And the real wages have been fallen for 3 times in a row. So this is a big problem. So our households are strongly and will continue to be affected by this high inflation rate, and their, let's say, consumption dynamic will be slow. And definitely this inflation is practically represents pressure on wages. And minimum wage particularly. We in the Czech Republic, we don't have still this indexation mechanism. So the minimum wage is always consulted with both social partners, but politically decided by the government. This year minimum wage was increased by 6%, and there is a further pressure of our trade unions for further increase by 10–13%. But we as employers, we understand the situation, but on the other hand, it is necessary to see also the productivity development. And one of the basic characteristics of our labor market is low productivity and limited mobility, and also insufficient structure of job seekers. So definitely we will discuss the further development of minimum wage. It is always at the end of the year, so we will see the discussion and consultation with trade unions and our government. And it brings me to labor market shortages, because this is a big question for employers, particularly for sectors like construction and manufacturing. already before the COVID crisis. It was about around 40% of companies have been suffering by labor market shortages, and in manufacturing sector it was 45. But I see a little bit other or different, slightly different reason for this labor market shortages. It is not only because aging of labor force and because negative demographic development. It is also about the lack of reforms. Slow reform progress in education and also with the labor market policies. But what are the solutions? How to, let's say, address these labor market shortages? My colleagues are just concentrating mainly on short-term measures. That is, for example, how to activate again this short working time schemes. It is very important. So we are just negotiating with the relevant ministries how to set a mechanism, fair mechanism, and criteria for this labor or this short working schemes. It must be connected with the increase of energy prices. So this is one solution, and the other solution is to, let's say, progress and to use full potential of our already existing migration, labor migration or legal migration preferential schemes. So we are fighting each day for higher quotas, for broadening of resource countries, etc. Concerning the let's say future solutions, it was already said also by Oliver. It is about active labor market policies, about motivation, activation people. We are just negotiating kind of amendment of labor code, so it is new forms of work, teleworking, because we don't see so many risks as trade unions in voluntary teleworking. And as I said, activation of inactive people. And it is also about education, reskilling, upskilling. So this is the way adult learning, because particularly Czech Republic is not definitely not front runners in adult learning. And the third way is labor migration. So to be innovative and to be more open for labor migration. So from this reason, Czech Republic, just now our Ministry of Labor was presenting last week new strategy for labor migration. And one small remarks. I am happy that Agota mentioned also some points which was also covered by the OECD Outlook. It is a gender dimension. It is important, and work-life balance, and also working time, because we are already in 21st century, so labor markets are changing. So we are promoting as employers this new forms of work, and it is connected also with new adjustment of working time. And shortly to Oliver, because Oliver has presented us also some, let's say, policy responses. And I fully agree with all of them. For fostering collective bargaining, you know, in Central European countries, it is rather about tripartism. It must be clear that the solutions are discussed at this highest, let's say, tripartite bodies. So definitely, even if there are some bilateral social dialogues, but tripartism has a priority. And the same comments is that you are a little bit mixing the short-term measures and long-term measures, because your last slide was about, let's say, labor market policies, active labor market policies, and this is let's say for mid-term steps. But definitely, it is not possible to divide it, because we have to fight on both fronts. So. It is they are my first comments, Nicola.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. And perhaps before I go to Agota, I want to pick up the last point with you, Oliver, the tripartite meetings, because you said some tripartite consultations. Here in Germany, they are seeing there's something called the concerted action that the chancellor set up. And in fact, it was to prevent a wage price spiral, basically saying, okay, the big partners, the trade unions, business associations and the government get together and they look at how they can address the cost of living crisis without running in this inflationary environment into a wage price spiral. And you said something about, but perhaps I misunderstood, that okay, if there's a decline in collective negotiations, it can be good because there's no risk of a wage price spiral. Perhaps you can just tell us what you were referring to, or whether there's a misunderstanding about tripartite agreements.
Yes, so thanks for the question, and absolutely from our perspective, this crisis is entailing a huge cost for all countries. And what we meant to show when discussing collective bargaining, the insight is that this cost entailed by the crisis must be shared somehow, and it must be shared between governments, employers, and workers. None of these three parties can, shoulder the burden of this crisis alone. And so some, workers will have to bear some of the costs, governments will have to bear some of the costs, and employers will have to bear some of the costs. And that's what we're seeing with these kind of initiatives, as in Germany, that they're speaking to each other and trying to see, that not one party suffers the most, but, everybody adjusts, sort of. And so definitely tripartite solutions are the way to go. Now, in terms of, the decline in collective, so what we saw in the 70s, was basically very high increases in wages. And that had two reasons why there were these high increases. Two reasons were that collective bargaining coverage was very high, and there was also automatic wage indexation. And so because you had these two factors, it contributed to very high wages and contributed to the wage price spiral that we saw back in the 70s. Here, I'm stating simply, if collective bargaining coverage is lower, the risks of a wage price spiral are lower. It's just it's just a fact. But it still, at the same time, we don't have the benefit of ensuring adequate wage increases. So there needs to be a balanced solution to be found, and these tripartite solutions, initiatives that we've seen are really the way to go from our perspective.
Thank you. And Slavomir, you're raising your hand. I will give you the word, but then I have important questions to Agota. So please be short.
Yes, very short, because this is a reaction on this what was said by Vladka and by Olivier. Sorry, lads, but tripartism does not solve any problems without strong bipartite relation. We had a very interesting project conducted by Dublin Foundation together with employers and trade unions from Central Eastern Europe, and the outcomes were obvious. If you don't have strong bipartite dialogue, government will ignore you. So the basis bipartite, next you can go to the tripartite conciliation.
That's a very interesting and important point, Slavomir. Thank you very much. Agota, so now Hungary, it seemed to, in many ways, in some ways, it seemed to stand out, a bit like the Czech Republic. We saw in manufacturing, actually, these skills shortages seem to be easing. but also the problem of real wage erosion didn't seem to be the same as in other countries. So maybe you can just fill us in. What's the situation in Hungary? And where do you see the main issues? And then, of course, as you please, you can pick up on some of the points that were said before, like addressing labor shortages through telework, through more women in the labor market, through migration.
Right. I'll definitely won't be able to answer all the questions or clarify everything, because we still lack microdata. So a lot of these issues can be clarified if we can look into the at least the labor force survey at the individual level. But maybe I'll just highlight a couple of points that might add to the picture that we've seen so far. So one part of the explanation to the Hungarian developments could be that we've lost some of the demand on the labor market that was presented by relatively low productivity small firms, for example, in catering. So the improvement in labor shortages could actually be partly due to a decline in labor demand in some sectors. And these would be particularly sectors where the price levels are not very flexible. So basically these employers cannot increase wages because they're on a highly competitive market or not very productive. And maybe, while I fully agree to what Vlatka mentioned as regards the importance of education in improving or in reducing labor shortages, regarding migration, I think Hungary has an issue or has strong limitations, partly because of the language constraints. So, the Hungarians who could migrate to Hungary are already there, and most are actually returning to Slovakia or Romania. And also we have a political issue that the country is simply not presenting itself as welcoming to migrants from coming abroad. And maybe two last points that I haven't been mentioned much, but I find them important. One is that I think all these countries, maybe except Estonia, should invest a lot more in developing their public employment services, not only the money spent on ALMP, but on the quality of how the money is spent, and especially training and retraining schemes, upskilling. And another issue is how these countries could support mobility, geographical mobility within the country. I think we all have an issue with housing and social housing. So you can't move from the underdeveloped regions to the more developed ones because you can't find a place to stay. And if I still have 1 second, let me reflect on the potential solution of working time reductions. I think in a general way, this doesn't look like a highly relevant solution in Eastern Europe, simply because the general level of income is not high enough so that people can't afford to work reduced hours. But it could be a partial solution in 2 areas. At least one is motherhood and parental leave policies. So if short working time can be combined with cash benefits during parental leave, that could be a solution, especially for Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Hungary, where we have very long parental leaves, and these are very difficult to cut in duration because of political reasons. And the other area where I think this is relevant for Hungary specifically, maybe not so much for the other countries, is around retirement, because our retirement policies are incredibly inflexible in Hungary at the moment. So you can only move practically from full-time to 0, which is very inefficient. And so there's an obvious case for supporting working time reductions in that area in Hungary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agota. I think Oliver hasn't presented it, but if I'm not mistaken, and you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, Oliver, is that the Employment Outlook looks at the case where you have a working time reduction with full wage compensation, right? So it was not so much the idea about part-time work. But Iga, I wanted to get back to something with you because you know the data very well in Poland that Sławek mentioned at the beginning, where he said, well, one reason for the labor shortages is brain drain, people leaving the country. And I'm just wondering whether you already have enough data to see whether and how this might have changed with, well, two trends. One is that obviously Poland is getting richer and attractive jobs in Poland as well. But then, of course, with the pandemic was very disruptive with border closures, etc. And what we observe in German-speaking countries is strong labor shortages in gastronomy and some low-paid services where workers from also neighboring countries have worked, and they seem to have disappeared. So I'm just wondering whether you can see in the data how migration trends may have been affected by the pandemic. Yeah, that would be interesting to hear.
Actually, we know little about pandemic and migration and shortages. And to be quite honest, we have no evidence that those workers that are missing in Germany would be back in Poland. No, we don't see that actually. But what we do see is that the Ukrainian war and the huge inflow of Ukrainian women has actually changed a lot the patterns of migration and mismatches, because those women, they are extremely well educated, if I may say so. Over 60% of them have tertiary education. And that is something that it's really a challenge to manage that human capital that we see inflowing into Poland, because so far for the moment they seem to be working, of course, below their qualifications and filling in those gaps at the low end, whereas they truly have qualification skills to get better jobs and better paid jobs and higher quality and higher skill demand jobs. So that is something that we have seen already in a few tentative studies on that there's a really high human capital that we have seen inflowing into Poland.
So it's basically Sławomir, he already talked about lifelong learning and making sure that matches are good, but it's also a bit definitely an issue in many OECD countries recognizing experience and also certificates, so university degrees and other things. So that's perhaps something that needs to be worked on.
And also we need to improve the ALMP and services offered by the PES, as Agota mentioned. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good. I have a question from the audience, and I almost want to give that to you, Latka. Randall is asking that you hear a lot about record profits for firms during this period. And if that's true, and to the extent that it's true, is it wouldn't firms, or at least those firms, not be in a position to offer higher wage increases? Is that how about that? How do you see the variation in profits from the employer side?
Frankly speaking, I don't understand the question.
He's asking that he hears in the media about a lot about record profits for firms during this period. So some firm, I don't know what he refers to. You hear it for some energy firms actually, but also others. So he was asking, couldn't firms offer higher wage increases to preserve real wages?
I am afraid that I'm not able to respond to this question, because it is more complex, and it is particularly up to my colleagues in economic department. Sorry for that.
Yeah, no problem. Probably it varies also a lot by sector and by firm. So Sławomir, you raised your hand.
Yes, because I can help in answering this question. You have two perspectives. One is long-term perspective. The second one is current perspective. The long perspective is that for many years, productivity growth has outpaced real wage growth in our region. So the employers were able to save a lot of money. So due to this reason, I don't afraid that real wages will not keeping pace with inflation, but probably it will be take a time, because this hiking inflation is really dangerous. But we have also the short time situation where energy companies have a great profits due to speculate of energy prices. And this is not only the case in Poland, Czech, or Hungary. This is problem of the whole EU. Therefore, the European Council, as far as I remember, will have special meeting concerning introducing the solution to do special tax for this. So this is this. So it has this short-term situation and the long-term. This long-term situation will cause that finally the real wages in Central Eastern Europe will keep pace with rising inflation, and it will contribute to the wage convergence within the whole EU in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Slavik. And we're already a bit past our time, but I do have one question for you, Agota. And I don't know whether you can see it in the chat, but I'm going to read it so that, or summarize it so everybody can hear it. So it's basically, you can see the name, but probably a Hungarian lady who's asking, well, you Agota, you mentioned as a possible solution for labor shortages, parental leave combined with work benefits. And she says that that this already exists, so parents can work after the child reached the age of 6 months and receive their benefit as well. After the age of 6 months? 6 months, I thought 6 years. And it doesn't seem to have an impact on labor market participation of young mothers. So she was wondering what you're referring to as a solution. Would you give a twist to this policy, or?
Yes. Thanks. That gives me an extra minute. Yes, I fully agree that in the Hungarian case for parental leave policies, some of the measures are already in place, so you can potentially combine benefits with work. What's still missing is more investment in childcare facilities, so that you can place your child in a high quality care facility. I think we have an issue not only with the lack of or the availability of childcare for kids under age 3, but also also quality, because the children to nurse rates are very high, and we probably also need some encouragement for employers to think more openly about part-time. I think there seems to be issues there or limitations there, both in terms of how to organize work, so management issues, and probably also mindset issues and trust in how part-time workers could be just as efficient as full-time workers.
On that, if I may continue a little bit through our time, perhaps Iga, because you had this interesting work, well, one where you showed that flexibility is very limited in Central and Eastern Europe, or working time flexibility, and then and if I build on what Agota just said, so is it incentives, or Slavomir, he said, well, we need stronger bilateral dialogue between employers and trade unions. Could that be a solution? Well, it's not easy to build, but would that be a good solution to negotiate more flexible working time? What do you see as a solution there?
Very shortly, I mean, we do need lots of complex and complementing each other actions to improve the situation. But actually, improving the social dialogue is surely a way of improving solving many of the problems we see on the labor market. I mean, you can't introduce working time flexibility or like enforce it with a rule of law or just force it by the government. What you can do is to encourage workers and employers to sit down and talk and so that they can improve the working conditions for workers and keep the skills they need in their workplace. Yeah, negotiations, social dialogue between employers and employees is really a way forward for many of the solutions we would like to see introduced on the labor market in Poland, but I guess it refers to most of Central Eastern European countries.
Even Western countries. And Vladka, you were also nodding when Agota said we need more incentives for working time flexibility. Perhaps the last word from the employer perspective, if you want, on working time flexibility.
Yes, definitely. It is on our agenda in these days. This let's say, more innovative working time policies, and I think that the employers have already open mind. Because and are open to this work-life balance solutions, because we need the mothers particularly, and young parents with children on the labor market, definitely, because this is one of the solutions to attract this groups. But it depends on the child facilities, accessibility, and affordability. And you know maybe that we are operating at the European level with this so-called Barcelona targets. So it will help us, I think, let's reach this targets or solve the solution and bring mother and young parents on the labor market. And we support as well this new flexible form of works, and but many times are this form discussed in negative manner. So as let's say less secure, etc. So and this is the discussion between employers and trade unions. What is the, let's say, balanced way, and I would like also to come back to shortly to telework, because telework just now have positives and negatives aspects, and now is in the air also question if the jobs which are not teleworkable will be less attractive as the other jobs. So it is also very, very interesting question. And also concerning this brain drain, I think that the situation is not so hot in Central and Eastern European countries. We are talking rather about brain circulation. And on the other hand, I fully agree with Iga and with Slavomir that involvement of social partners in policy making and decision is absolutely important. And but in a crisis, in the time of crisis, is always good to that also governments are, let's say, involved and have also some responsibility. So it is my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. We're well far past our time, but Sławomir, you have the final word. Your hand is raised. So
I don't want to have final words, but a very funny anecdote concerning this flexibility, because it's quite funny. A dozen or so years ago, there were attempts to promote the idea of flexicurity within the EU. This is based on Danish experiences. And the emphasis was on greater flexibility for employers and the security for employees. And now we see that situation is completely reversed. Employees, new generation of employees wants more flexibility, and employers want more security that they have enough workers in their plants. So we see how the things can change. Thanks.
Reverse flexicurity. Good point. And I will, well, before I thank everybody, I will throw in Isabella Kaczmarska's point that public employment service do, for example, finance or can finance language courses for Ukrainians, and they can, well, and also the other one, I don't understand, but anyway, thanks Isabella for throwing this in. Nostrification fee to help they help to recognize foreign diplomas. So that's good. It's not that they need to be strengthened, public employment services in the regions and in many other regions, by the way. But they're making progress. And in general, I enjoyed very much discussing with you, Vladka, Slavomir, Agota, Iga, and Oliver, and getting some insights. So these are very tumultuous, very difficult times, but we managed to address that, the crisis, and also look beyond that a little bit in the longer term. I think it was very fruitful, and I hope there will be more discussions like this. Thank you very much, and have a good day.